Hello, this is Troy Espy, your instructor for Library Resources 101, and this is a lecture for April 27th, 2020. In this lecture, we will explore evaluating sources. First, I'll give you a few examples of why it's important to evaluate sources, including how it can affect your grades. And then I will share with you a couple step-by-step methods for evaluating sources. Let's start with why it's important to evaluate sources. So in 1998, there was a conservative blogger named Matt Drudge, and he published an outlandish story that the President of the United States was having an affair with a White House intern. And this is the actual blog post. Now, I highly doubt that this blog post was peer-reviewed. Not sure it was even edited. And if you read it, it contains biased writing and there are anonymous sources. Plus, the guy didn't even put his name on it. And let me give you some historical context, because this blog was published probably before many of you were born. Now, blogs were relatively new in 1998. The World Wide Web had been invented only 9 years before, and in 1998, that's actually 6 years before Facebook even existed. So much like today, blogs weren't a respected news source. They weren't really considered news sources at all. Blogs were more like novelty items. The mainstream media were way more entrenched 20 years ago. Well, that blog eventually led to the impeachment of a United States president. Only the second president in history to get impeached, a blog. Also in 1998, actually just about a month after the Drudge Report, a peer-reviewed journal published an article whose fallout continues today. The Lancet is a prestigious British medical journal. How prestigious? It has a 5% acceptance rate. So of 20 researchers who submit articles to the Lancet, one gets published. In fact, it's as hard to get published in the Lancet as it is to get accepted into Harvard. That's how stringent the standards are. Now, you've probably never heard of the Lancet, but your doctor has, because articles published in the Lancet influence medical care throughout the world, even here in Stevens Point. So in 1998, The Lancet published a research article that revealed a possible link between childhood vaccinations and autism. And as expected, the article had a profound effect because suddenly parents were afraid to vaccinate their children. And as you can expect, outbreaks of measles started popping up and children died. The Lancet eventually retracted the whole article because the findings were inaccurate. The Lancet essentially branded the article as fake news. But even though the article was retracted, as you well know, the vaccination debate rages on today. So what's the moral of the story? Well, really, it's question everything. Because sometimes the biased blog gets it right, and sometimes the prestigious medical journal gets it wrong. Now that's an extreme example, but I encourage you to evaluate every source of information. So don't blindly accept a peer-reviewed journal as credible, and don't blindly dismiss a blog as fake news. Now let me give you a more straightforward example. So there used to be a website called martinlutherking.org, and in fact I used to assign that website in Library Resources 101, and I used to show it in other classes as well. So as recently as a couple of years ago, if you Googled Martin Luther King, this website would be one of the top results. Now this website was recently taken down, so I dug up an old copy in Internet Archive. But even though the website no longer is active, it still provides an important lesson. So let's say that you were writing a research paper on Martin Luther King. Naturally, you would Google Martin Luther King, and like I said, this used to be one of the top results. It's a website called Martin Luther King Jr., a true historical examination. Now, at first glance, it looks a little 90s-ish. I'm not really crazy about the colors and fonts, but I guess it looks credible. I mean, it talks here about historical writings. There's a civil rights library, so definitely like that. There's some suggested books. Down here there's an educational video. Plus, you know, it's a .org, and it was one of Google's top results. So I'm just going to assume that it's safe. But who made this website? It didn't appear by magic, and Google didn't make this website, but somebody did. Who? Well, if you scroll to the bottom of the home page, it says that it was hosted by Stormfront. I'm really not familiar with Stormfront, so I want to click on this link to find more. So this is Stormfront, and it says here, White Pride Worldwide. We are the voice of the new embattled white minority. Stormfront is a white supremacy group. And I'm not sure I would trust white supremacists to supply unbiased information about a civil rights leader. Probably not the first place I'd look. And like I said, I used to assign this website in Library Resources 101, and only about half of the students could figure out that it was hosted by a white supremacy group. And that really made me realize how important it is to evaluate sources. Because if college students, our smartest young adults, can identify a white supremacy group in one click, what chance does a third grader have when writing a report on Martin Luther King? So hopefully that illustration shows why it's important to evaluate sources for research assignment. And it's easy for librarians and professors to say that you should evaluate sources and apply critical thinking skills. But how do you actually do it? Well, during this lecture, we'll explore two popular methods for evaluating sources. First is the CARP, sometimes called the CRAP test, and the other one is the 5 W's. Both methods provide specific steps for determining if a source is credible or biased, and you'll have to use them both for the homework assignment. Let's start with the CARP test, which is sometimes called the CRAP test. They're both the same thing. CARP is an acronym that stands for currency, authority, accuracy, relevance, and purpose. Each letter is a criterion that you can apply to determine if a source is credible. This is Rate My Source. It's an interactive online tool developed at Coffran Library at UW Green Bay. Coffran Library was kind enough to share the tool with me for this class. As you can see, Rate My Source uses the CARP test by looking for currency, authority, accuracy, relevance, and purpose. After you answer the questions, Rate My Source gives you a recommendation if the source is reliable or not. You will have to use Rate My Source for the homework assignment. So for the homework assignment, I'm going to give you an article, and then you'll enter information from that article into Rate My Source. So on the first screen, you simply enter the article's title, which happens to be CWD Unleashed, and then you click on the next button. The next button, sometimes you have to scroll down. It can be a little bit difficult to find. And then you click on next. Okay. Then you answer questions for each letter of the CARP test. The first is currency. Rate My Source asks you how old is the source. So let's say that you can't find the date. So then you would click on this option. I can't find a publication or creation date. So I'm going to click on that. And then Rate My Source gives you instant feedback. It says most credible sources will include a publication date. So that's a warning sign that it might not be a reliable source. Okay, so let's click on next. And let's go to authority. So who is the author? Is it a scholar? Is there no author? Is it an organization? Let's say the author is a journalist, so a professional journalist or writer. I'm going to click on this option. And down here, Rate My Source says, professional reporters and other writers frequently write for a general audience, and they usually follow a set of ethics and standards. This is an indication that this is probably a popular source. And that's kind of what I've been saying all along in this course. Popular sources aren't so bad. Okay, let's go to the next screen. Next, we're still on authority, and it says, where was this source published? Was it a peer-reviewed journal? Was it a book? Etc., etc. Let's say that the information was published on a website. So if you click on website, it actually gives you another follow-up question. Okay, well, who is responsible for the content of this website? Well, let's say you found the information on social media. So I would click this option, and then it says, you kind of get a frown face here. It can be difficult or impossible to verify who the author is on sites like this, making it hard to judge their authority and expertise. Personal blogs, social media, and wikis are generally not considered appropriate for college level research. Okay, so again, that instant feedback. Then you move on to accuracy, and so on and so forth. I think you'll get the hang of it, but contact me if you have any problems. Once you've answered all the questions in Rate My Source, you'll arrive at this screen. Rate My Source will give you an overall recommendation. And for your homework, you'll have to tell me that recommendation. For example, for this source it says, not a reliable source. And then for the homework, you'll have to copy and paste the text in this box. So don't exit the screen before copying the text. I've purposely given you a difficult source to evaluate. However, you don't have to read the article word for word. You still should be able to answer all the questions by reading the first couple paragraphs and then inspecting different elements of the article, such as the bibliography and author's bio. I've run the article through Rate My Source, and I do agree with the overall recommendation. However, I'm hoping that Rate My Source will show you important questions to ask when evaluating any source. So that was the CARP test. Now let's explore the 5 W's. This is the evaluation method that I use most often, and I'll explain why in a little bit. When you use the 5 W's, you're kind of pretending that you're an investigative journalist. You're trying to get to the bottom of the story. You're trying to find out the real motive. Of the 5 W's, we'll take a closer look at who and why. Like I said, sources don't appear by magic, and that's especially important to remember about websites. Someone published the information. Who? If you can determine the author, the rest typically falls into place. So for example, when we discovered that a white supremacy group was responsible for the Martin Luther King website, that raised some major concerns. That's why I think who is the most important question to ask of the 5 W's, and that's also a homework question. Because if you know the person or a group responsible for the information, you can ask these questions. So is the person an expert? What is their education? What is their profession? Also, you want to know, what is the person's affiliation? Is it with the government or a hospital, a university, or is the person affiliated with a white supremacy group? If a group is responsible for the website, look for an About Us link or a mission statement. And if you can't determine who created the content, that's a major warning sign. In general, avoid anonymous sources. So when I encounter an anonymous source, I just assume it was created by Russian hackers, and I look for something else. And that's really why professors don't accept Wikipedia as a source for research assignments. Wikipedia articles are anonymous. We don't know who is writing them, and we don't know the author's qualifications. In fact, there are no qualifications for writing a Wikipedia article. All you need is an internet connection. You don't even have to create an account. Along with who, you also should ask why. It requires you to use your critical thinking skills. Again, information doesn't appear by magic. Why did someone publish it? What you're really looking for is motive. Was the motive to profit, to entertain, to inform, to educate, to promote a viewpoint? These questions will help you identify bias. So why does it matter? If a professor says you can use websites for sources for research assignments, then use a website. A website is a website is a website, right? Well, not necessarily. Shady sources can affect your grade. Let me show you. This is a citation for a website in MLA style. The citation actually contains 4 of the 5 W's. Author is who. The web page is what. The date is when. And then the website is where. If all you know is web page and the website, you're missing half the citation. You don't know who, and you don't know when. Your professors are going to know that you didn't look very hard for sources. And once you found sources, you didn't evaluate them very carefully. I'll let you in on a secret. When professors grade your research papers, they look at your bibliography first. If your bibliography contains mostly websites with half the citation missing, you're not off to a very good start. Your grade is going to suffer. That's why I like the 5 W's. It correlates directly to your citations and can improve your grades. There is no guaranteed method for evaluating sources. The Lancet vaccine article would have passed both the CARP test and the 5 W's easily, while the Drudge Report blog would have failed both tests. And what about fake news? If a fake news story has an author and a date, that means it's credible? Well, of course not. That's why I encourage transparency. Clearly cite your sources. In college, if you don't cite your sources, it's plagiarism and you can get kicked out of school. But transparency is more important than that. When you're transparent, you empower your audience, whether that's your professor, your classmates, or your friends on social media. You let them know exactly where you got the information, and then they can decide if it's credible or not. For example, if you cite Fox News, you're likely to get different reactions. For some people, Fox News is nothing but Republican propaganda. For others, Fox News is the only source they trust. But at least you're being transparent and letting your audience make up their own minds. One way to increase your chances of finding credible websites is to search by domain. Google Advanced Search lets you do that. Now, unfortunately, Google kind of hides its advanced search. In fact, you pretty much have to Google it. So I'm going to Google Advanced Search, typing it in the search bar here in Google, and click the enter button on my keyboard, and it is the first result here, Google Advanced Search. So I'm going to go ahead and open that link. Now, Google Advanced Search gives you many options, and there are some helpful examples over here on the right, including some Boolean operators. Now, the first box here is for keywords. So let's say that you're writing a college research paper about cancer. So I am going to enter the keyword cancer, okay, into that first search box. And then if I scroll down, you're going to see an option called Site or Domain. And for domain, I'm going to enter .edu. Okay, so that means that Google will retrieve only websites that end in .edu. So only results from educational institutions. So let's see what we get. I entered the keyword cancer. I only want results from the domain .edu, and I'm going to click on Advanced Search right here. Okay, so first result is from Harvard. The next result is from the University of Minnesota. Let's see here, National Cancer Institute. scroll down here, Stanford. So some pretty highly respected colleges, all with their own hospitals and all with their own medical schools. Now, this doesn't guarantee that these results are credible, but I like my chances. Now, let's search for cancer websites without using the domain of .edu. So up here at the search bar, I'm just going to delete site.edu, just leave the keyword cancer, and then search. Okay, so first one is cancercenter.com. Next one here is cancerresearch.org. Again, they're probably fine, but I'd want to dig a little deeper. And even in a website that ends in .org, like this one, cancerresearch.org, you never know, because martinlutherking.org, that turned out to be hosted by white supremacists. So a .org website is not a guarantee that it's legitimate. Okay, so let's keep scrolling down, see what else we find. National Cancer Institute ends in a .gov, so that's going to be a government website. So I personally would be more inclined to trust that. Same thing here, National Cancer Institute. And then here we have WebMD. Now, again, the information in WebMD is probably just fine, but you do have to remember this. WebMD is a for-profit website. Okay, so you have to wonder about motive. Okay, so WebMD gets money from pharmaceutical companies. Does that influence their content somehow? I'm not really sure, but it's something to consider. Okay, then here we have Wikipedia, right? So the information in this Wikipedia article could be accurate, but I know that it's going to be anonymous, and I know I'm not going to be able to figure out who wrote it. Okay. And then if I keep going down here, probably find some similar ones today. Okay, this one's medicinenet.com. Again, I've never heard of it. I'd want to do some more digging before using information from it. So I think you kind of get the picture. When we searched without the .edu domain, it seemed like we got a lot more questionable websites. Now, that's not to say that these websites are inaccurate. They might be fine, but I'd want to verify the information first, and that takes time. Now, if your research paper is due in half an hour, you might not have that luxury. And that's not to say that the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world don't make mistakes, because they definitely do. But when a professor looks at the bibliography of your research paper, what citation would you rather have? Harvard.edu or medicine.net.com? So searching by domain, particularly .edu and .gov, can save you time and potentially improve your grades. Now that you've watched the lecture, please complete the quiz. The quiz includes analyzing an article using Rate My Source. Please take your time. If you rush through it, you won't get the correct overall recommendation, and you won't get credit for that question of the quiz. More importantly though, Rate My Source shows you which questions you should ask whenever you're evaluating a source. Basically, it's teaching you good habits. I think the instant feedback in Rate My Source is helpful too, because so often sources fall in a gray area, and you have to use your critical thinking skills to ultimately determine if a source is credible. The quiz is due before midnight, Thursday, April 30th. You will lose 0.7 of a point for each day late. Thank you for listening to the lecture. Please contact me if you have any questions.